Record. All right, guys. Well, we are now going to pick up and try to finish off our discussion of loops here. So we'd actually skipped a day. Yesterday, we had been talking a little bit more specifically about like what the plans were, how are we going to structure this time together moving forward, and my friend's learning path here for programming, and balancing that with the time it takes for me. And I think one thing that we decided before we go on here is that one of the best ways, of course, to get better at something is to practice directly. And you don't have to try very hard to find practice resources for teaching yourself how to program. So if you want practice in terms of finding problems that use functions and conditionals and loops, well, I mean, I just off the top of my head, I'd heard about this one before, and then this was just a Google away. We found some resources here that my friend can use to practice. And then if you get stuck, well, first off, some of these have solutions, and the ones that have solutions are good because, theoretically, it's completely hands off, right? Once we go through the basics, we've learned the basically the building blocks of how you program. Well, then you can just take one of these categories here, go find a problem that looks like it's useful, and then try to do it. And if you get really stuck, you look at the solution. And depending on how well these are commented and how obvious the code is and how good the solutions are, maybe I don't need to be involved at all past a certain cursory once in a while. Now, I did kind of decide that, looking through some of these, there are practice problems that will not be very useful. So for example, one of the practice problems, somewhere in here, I don't remember which one exactly, was dealing with recursion, which is a topic that I've argued really isn't terribly useful in a practical day-to-day sense as a programmer, since we don't use it very much in most production environments. Some people probably do, but not most people. And then there were practice problems on how to get permissions on files if you're on a Linux system. That won't be relevant to people who don't use Linux, or Unix POSIX systems. For example, we use Windows 10 at work. Some of the government people do use Red Hat Linux, enterprise, but you get the idea. Things that I don't think are so widely applicable, probably wouldn't really recommend spending time, since time's such a finite limited resource, spending time on things that aren't all that useful. So I think probably what the best path here will be, and I remember in the introductory series, the other time over, when we first started with HTML and JavaScript, this was exactly what I was thinking we'd move into eventually, AKA I find some practice, and then I structure what I think is valuable. And then, so I'm still involved, and we're still working through what's the word? The topics and resources that I think are valuable in terms of getting a quick functional grasp on programming and being able to do useful things rapidly, right? That was one of the whole emphases of this series that we're doing here. For me specifically, at least, is that I would like to have this resource available for people to learn programming without having to learn all of the things that you don't actually need, which for whatever reason seems to be quite a lot in how most people teach it. We won't overly belabor this point today, much more than I already have, so much as this is where we're going. Once we finish our initial discussion, so today specifically, we're going to do a couple more examples with loops and the things that you can do with loops. And then we're going to talk some about exceptions. And then after that, that is going to be most of the practice here. Now, I have some practice problems also still left here. My friend has done some of the ones that I've made. But we'll have several still here in this file. You see, this one's about dictionaries. This one's about checking if something's in lists or not. Both of those don't actually require loops. And then all of the loop-based practice that I've had here. First two are dealing with palindromes, so that's string processing. And then the last one is another thing with the dictionary and calculating salaries and stuff. But after all those, I will, over the next little bit, be coming up with some of these problems. Tell them, hey, go to this page. And for example, here's one with practice exercises on lists. They'll say, go to this page with practice exercises on lists and do example number, 35. I don't actually know if that's a good one or not, but I'll find ones that look good to me, and then we'll do practice that way. And then if you get super stuck, like as in looks at the solution and still doesn't make sense, well then I can get pulled into it. Either we just chat over text, or we actually have more recordings eventually if enough questions pile up. And that way it's time efficient for both of us, because people learning programming have all of this practice, which is probably the best way to learn it in a practical sense. And then I also can help only as needed. So I don't have to hover, and it's really not that big a bother. I'm sure past a certain point, if things get hard enough, I won't be able to just answer. But for many problems where we're still kind of honing basic skills, it's not very burdensome for people who are already programmers to answer questions like, I don't see where I'm wrong, I'm stuck, can you help me? Because a lot of the time, it's not a very time intensive process. It's oh, here's what you do instead. And so very commonly, if you have a job and you have more senior developers in your job, that's exactly what they do. Basically, the culture at most companies isn't, oh, as soon as you get stuck, go ask someone, because then you're just constantly bothering them. Usually, at least this is how it works where I work in my workplace, is what I've observed on other teams as well. It's you get stuck, you try for a good bit on your own, and by on your own, I don't mean you just try and bang your head against the wall. You Google as much as possible. I was joking with my friend about this the other day. We barely even read the error messages we get from the compiler. I mean, we do. We see if it's something like really obvious, like, I don't know, we didn't convert the data type, or we're trying to return something in the wrong place or something. But if it's like anything that is remotely complicated, we like skim it to make sure it's not something obvious that we can fix. And then if it isn't, we just paste it straight into Google. We barely even read it, because why would you reinvent the wheel? And I've argued about this in the more like not so hands-on part of this programming series that we're putting up here, that it's really silly to try to like feel like you need to go do all this on your own, right? Because all of this has already been done before. And if you search around on the internet, usually you'll find someone who's had exactly the same problem as you, and then you copy what they did for the solution, and then you don't have to come up with a solution. So I don't want to get even more off topic than I already am here, but this process of practicing, and then if you get super stuck, ask someone. I would say that's really how I learned how to program. I mean, so I had, I don't know, 15, 20 classes in college. I used maybe 4 of them, 3 of them, the object-oriented classes, the basic programming classes, the web class, some networks, I guess. Not so much from the academic classroom environment, though. By far, what made me a better developer was being on a team where I was supposed to be doing these things. And then if I got stuck, I would do my best on my own, come up with a plan. Okay. And then I would go talk to one of the senior devs and be like, okay, I tried this. I can rule these things out, and I really don't know what to do here. Here's what I've attempted. Here's the things we can cross off the list. I did my best, but can you help get me unstuck now so I stop spinning my wheels? Lots and lots of, of course, I've gotten a lot better over the months. I asked one of the senior guys yesterday about something. We were trying to save a map to a database. So a map is like a dictionary in Python. However, databases, relational databases, don't generally have like a, what's the best way to phrase it? Like a great way to just store a map of objects. So something that has string keys mapping to other string keys. And the use case for this is have a very big thing we're importing, and we wanted to provide useful error message validation to the user. So because like the Excel file they're importing had like 100 columns or something, and we wanted to, when we import the file, if there's an issue with something on one of the columns, we wanted to tell them which column, and then put a flag next to it. And then tell them what the message was. But you can't actually just stick that in the database as easily and apparently as you might think. So we looked a little and had some ideas, and we talked about JSON serialization. So we're going to store the thing in the database as a string, and then C# is going to do the heavy lifting to convert it from a string to the data type, and from the data type to the string. And we don't have to write our own custom string parser to do it because that's kind of bad practice, right? If we have to write something that we have to maintain and test ourselves versus just using something built in, well, we've kind of not used the right tool for the job. So that's just an example. And this is me, you know, I've been coming up on 2 years at my job now. And I don't ask about many things that I would get stuck on earlier because you do learn progressively, but I do still ask. And so that is very much the environment, pulls back on topic. That's very much the environment that we're going to move towards here, which is practice, practice, practice. That is the most important thing here. Lots of problems going across your eyeballs here to just hammer in how you solve problems when you program, because a lot of the time you're going to have to figure out basically how to do things right there, because you're not going to be given, you know, a nice pseudocode template to go you know, make the pseudocode into code. What you're going to be given is a description in words of what something's supposed to do, and then you're going to have to go make it. And that's why we're going to put such a big focus on practicing. And that's for all the reasons I just described about how in my opinion, you know, trying your best on your own until you get stuck, and then asking an experienced person who comes and gets you unstuck, just how valuable that is as a learning tool. That's why that's the model that we're going to be moving towards. So this is probably all review for us because we talked about all this yesterday, but now that we're on the recording, that is what we will be going towards as soon as we finish the rest of the basics here. So what do we have left? Well, we have reading things in from a file, building an event loop for user interaction, and then after that, exceptions. So both of these things are, to my mind, these are good examples of how you might use loops. So I think we've hit all the basics of for loops and while loops, and we talked about break and continue, I think, last time we recorded here. Continue, you know, we were talking about how if you have different types of things, usually you can arrange your conditional so you don't strictly need continue, but sometimes it might make the code a little bit more readable. You know, you want to do a function for only certain types of things. That was the example we used here with some employees being hourly and some employees being salaried. Well, what happens if you want to calculate the salary just for the hourly people so that you have a basis of comparison? Well, you wouldn't want to do the same operations then to the salaried people because they don't have the same data. I think we've hit enough of loops that we're going to go ahead and get into some of the more complicated examples here. And as I've emphasized before, one of the things that you're going to have to get good at as a programmer is figuring out how to do something. Maybe you know how to do it conceptually at a high level, but figuring out how to do it with the languages and packages available to you in whatever language you're working in right now. So I know exactly how you do this in C#. You read things in from a file. You read the file into memory, you make a memory stream out of it, and then you open it up using this tool or that tool. I mean, I don't even know if I know the package names off the top of my head, but I've done this before in C#, specifically with Excel files. That's what we've done a lot of imports with. But as to how we do this for a text file in Python, I mean, I know more or less how you do it. However, I'm going to have to Google it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say import things from text file Python read line. So typically a programming language will have something that is called like read lines or read line or something. And what that will do is you open a text file in your programming, and then you can loop through all of the lines in the text file one by one. That's what we're going to be doing here. So let's see, whatever, first link, second link. Common task in programming is opening a file and parsing its contents. Right, good, that's what we want. Basic file IO in Python. Okay, so the first thing is we need to open the file. Now, this is something here that we are going to use. So it used to be that when you open files, you would have to basically dispose, or not dispose. I'm trying to think if I want to talk about this now or not. You know what, let's not talk about this until we get to exception handling. But when you open a file and when you're doing something where you're kind of dealing with an object on the data system, you're going to use this programming keyword right here called with. With, and then the open call here to a file as FP. This is like the variable that you're going to be using it as. What this will do is it will open this resource until you're done with it. And once the things using the resource have been done, it will close the resource automatically. And so if you open things, but you don't close them, you get what's called a memory leak. Or you can have all of these so-called file descriptors pointing to things on your hard drive, basically waiting to be written to or read from, but you're not using them because you forgot. And so this is why you see here, if you open something, you should always close it. That is what I'm trying to emphasize. However, it's really easy to forget. I mean, once you've written like enough of these, you'll probably remember, but how often do you really write something like this? And it's just more safe in general to let Python handle it itself. And it does that with the with keyword. So the with keyword means I'm going to do my stuff with this file right here, but then as soon as it's done, Python will automatically close it. Versus I'm going to do my stuff by opening the file, right, and then do stuff with it. And then I'm going to close it when I'm done. Well, what happens if you forget to close it? Then you have this file hanging out, waiting to be used that you're not using. And we won't get into all the reasons why that's bad, but that's bad. So you don't want, orphan files hanging out, waiting to be used in your code. So this is what we're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and open the file here using this thing. Now we don't have this, so we're going to actually go to our project here and we're going to add a file called, let's call the file example.txt text file. And that's come up with a, we don't really care what the content is here. Or actually, you know what? Let me, rather than just using fake stuff, let's say we actually do want, to make something. Let's say that we have, rather than txt, let's make this a little bit more useful. Let's make it a CSV file. Are you familiar with what a CSV file is?
CS what?
CSV file, comma separated value.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so what we're going to do here
yes.
is we're going to have like, let's say a basketball is going to be, how expensive are basketballs? I have no idea. Say basketball is $10. I hope I'm not like way off. Say a baseball is like, I don't know, less expensive probably, $5. Say that a soccer ball is going to be $8. And then I don't know why we're using balls in sports, but that's the first thing that popped into my head. So I guess we'll just do sports equipment in general. Let's say that soccer cleats, those are expensive. Let's say that those are $80 for a good pair. And then basketball shoes, say those are 75. Okay, so we could keep going, right? But now we have a file that has 6 lines of sports equipment and the corresponding price for the sports equipment, right? So in this, what we want to do is we want to read this information inside of our code to be able to use it. So let's say that the programming task that we want to be doing here is we want to read each line of that file, and then we want to read it into a dictionary so that we can do stuff with it. So at a high level, if we were to pseudocode this out, we'd want to, for each line in the file, and we would want to add it to dictionary to be able to. Okay. So I'm sure Python has a package for parsing CSV files automatically, but we're going to do it just with text tools ourselves for now. Best practice, the reason why I'm bringing this up is best practice code-wise is 100% to use the CSV package. So if you need to actually use CSV in production environments, you should use the CSV package, not what we're about to do. The only reason why I'm doing this is because it's a good example for us to do stuff and then be able to use string methods on each line and things like that. So I typically call my files F unless this conflicts with some variable outside of scope here. So we are going to open the file here. Now, are you familiar with paths? And like if I write something like that, does this mean anything to you? With the ... slash?
I think no, not really.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, and it's not bad if it doesn't. If you've ever worked on Unix file systems, or just had to deal with it in general, 2 dots followed by a slash. So the slashes are directories, right? 2 dots followed by a slash. This represents the parent directory to whatever one you're in. A single dot slash represents the current directory that you're in. And if you have a path that doesn't have any slash before it, so this would be, if you have a slash and then a file, this would be the root directory of wherever you are, just the slash, dot slash current directory, dot slash parent directory to where you are. No slash means that you're in the same directory. And then if I were to put a slash at the end, that would mean that I'd be looking at a child directory. So we'll do paths more later. But for now, since these two things are in the same directory here in our file structure, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to be able to use the file directly. Item-prices.csv. Okay, so now we're gonna use this with keyword. Like I mentioned here, we're gonna use it so that Python automatically handles closing the file when we're done with it. So now inside of this with call where we're using f, you can kind of think of this as like having its own context, right? F will only be defined inside of this with here. Why? Because Python is like going to control our access to that file, and then when we're done with it, it's going to handle it for us. And so f will only be defined if we are indented inside of this, because this is the only place where Python is saying, hey, you have access to the file here, and outside of that, I'm gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna make sure that we don't keep a file open when we don't need it. So for here, okay, so now we're gonna open this thing as f. Well, what is f? For now, you can think of f as a variable representing the file for Python. So some programming languages, I don't really want to get into file descriptors and what file descriptors are here, and how they interface with the operating system and things like that. But for now, just think of f or whatever we call this variable here. If you want to make it more explicit, you could even call this file. Maybe we'll do that here. Normally, I just use f because I know what it means, but so let's say that we want to open this as a variable representing the file. Okay, so what can you do with a file once you've opened it in Python? A text file specifically is what we're talking about here. Well, we see that some of the functions here, I'm just on this website. I'm sure you could go find, something, the actual documentation for this. So we've opened it. You can open things for reading or writing. Us specifically here, we want to read to it. You probably use read and write the most. I suppose you can use append as well, but you read to a file, or you read a file with read, you write to a file using write, and you use the open function with both. It's just the second argument that you pass to the open function. So now we've opened our file, and now we have different methods that we can use on it. So it says that the file object returned from the open function has 3 common explicit methods. One of them is called read, readline, and readlines. The read method reads in all the data into a single string. Well, that's not quite so useful to us because we would rather do things line by line, right? Rather than get all the data. Read line is a useful way to only read in individual lines in incremental amounts at a time and return them as strings. Sounds promising. So the last explicit method, read lines, will read all the lines of a file and return them as a list of strings. I think we will actually do exactly what readlines does. We'll implement it ourselves, and then we'll check ourselves with this. That's the plan that I have here. Okay, so we're going to read in a file line by line in Python with readline. Okay, so let's start off with the readline method, which reads a single line and which will require us to use a counter and increment it. Well, that's kind of what we're doing here. So what? Okay, so he is actually going to count the line numbers here. We don't actually need that count. We don't really care. We're just going to go for all the lines in the file. And this is where while loops come in handy. Depending on how people implement this, you will almost always use a while loop when you're doing what we're talking about here, where you are going through a file and you want to read everything in the file, but then you don't want it to like error out at the end. So we'll copy this code and then we'll modify it. Like I said, the reason why he's using a count variable here is because he's printing the line number. We don't really care about the line number particularly. So we'll come here and we still want that line. So we want to read in one line at a time using that readline function. And again, we'll check ourselves later with the thing that does everything for it. Why is that? That's that 2 indented? Yeah, that's 2 indented. So for now, we just want to print. We want to print the line. And then we want to increment it so that we go to the next one. So let me actually see, does Python have a do while loop? Python does have a do while loop. Or does it not? Whatever, you know what, we won't worry about it. What a do while loop lets you do is execute something the first time. The thing that you have, that basically is the increment condition in your iteration. It lets you execute that once before you start the loop. That's exactly what we're doing here. So you see how we're calling readline once before we even start the loop, and then we're calling it inside the loop to like get us to the next line after that. Well, rather than repeating this line twice, what a do while loop will let you do is it will let you do a set of statements here while the condition is still true. So it's another way of writing this basically, but don't worry about it. We'll write it this way. So let's get rid of FP and we'll use file here because that's what we did here. Okay, so
To ask about that.
Going to ask about what? The variable name?
Yeah, the file. Yeah, I thought it should be file rather than FP.
It should be indeed, and that's why it was giving us angry red. So we'll comment this out for now. I don't know. I think that'll get us a lot of stuff. And so when we see this, what we expect to have happen is that we'll see basketball first, then baseball, soccer ball, tennis ball, soccer cleats, basketball shoes. If we wrote this correctly, we should see all of those lines print out now. And so let's see if we wrote it correctly. Yep. So that 4 is coming from somewhere up there, whatever. But we're now printing out each thing in the file one by one. And you can see that the line that gets read in has a new line character on it, because see how there's 2 spaces in between things here? That means that there's 2 new lines. So in strings, are you familiar with how in a string, if we have like this, 1 new line character represents a line break and 2 new line characters represents then a line break and then an empty line after it?
Just the first one, the new line character. That's the one I know.
Okay, so this one means, okay, I'm going to go to the beginning of the next line. Well, if you were to concatenate this with an empty string and then concatenate it with another new line, what does that represent?
Empty string, not even a space, right?
Empty string, not even a space, just the empty string.
Okay, it will go to the beginning of another new line, right?
Okay, so after this line finishes, we're going to have a line called my line, and then a new line character jumps down to the bottom of the next line. And then on the next line, we're going to have nothing. And then we're going to add the new line after the nothing on the next line. So another way of thinking of that is that the next line only has a new line character on it. This means that the next line is empty. And so when we do another new line character, it's going to jump down to the second line below this one. And that's exactly what's happening here. So we have our line in the file here. And then we have in the file, you see how we don't have extra spaces, right? So we have this line, and then there's a new line character, right? I mean, there quote unquote is a new line character right there. I mean, it doesn't show up. It shows up visibly to us as an enter. And then there's a line and there's a new line character. And so the reason why this is happening here is because print by default in Python adds a new line character. And so if we wanted to see print Python do not add, I bet you that there's a method that lets you do it. without a new line is simple in Python 3. In order to print it without a new line, you need to add an extra argument to your print function that will tell the program that you don't want your new string to be on a new line. So we are going to terminate our strings by adding another thing here. Because we already have new lines implicit, we're going to give it an optional argument that sets the end character string on the strings here to empty. I think by default it's that, but we're going to set it to empty. Now when we run, no new lines, because we have new lines coming into us at the end of each line in the file. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's new lines. New lines are typically how we, of course, that's how we split lines when we're reading things line by line in a file. Okay, so we decided that what we wanted to do, initially what we'll do is we'll see if we can write the same thing as the read lines function, which is built in. We'll see if we can get everything as each line as a string value in a list. Okay, so we'll start out with a variable called line list, and we'll make that an empty list. And then for each line, we're still going to print it, but now we're going to also say line list. And what function do you think we should use here? Started typing it, whatever. We're going to use append to stick the line on the end of the list, right? And this should stick the lines in the list in order. And then at the end here, what we're going to do, we don't need to print the list inside of when we have the file open, because the file can be closed because this list is going to stick around in memory, right? So we don't care if we have access to the file anymore when we print this, because the line list is in Python. Well, the file can be closed because we stored it in Python. That's the whole point of this. We want to get the information in our file into Python here. Okay, so you can see here are the new line characters showing up in our strings. Right? I told you they were there. We saw that they were there, but here they are. So now we have all of the information in from the file as lines in a list of lines here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what we're going to do now is that was doing this, with a loop of our own. That's exactly why we're doing this. That's why we're practicing. But we'll see that Python actually has a way to, if we do line list 2 is equal to file.readlines plural, then by default, Python I'm going to do single print, which will print a new line. And I'm going to print line list 2. So all of this code here, the line equals file.readline, while line, line equals file.readline to go through line by line. Well, if all we want to do is make a list, which is exactly what this does right here. Well, Python already has a function built in that does that. So let's see if our list and their list are the same. Looks the same to me, right? Well, I suppose that doesn't need comment from you, but yes, it looks the same. You can see that in the real world, because this is a pretty common thing, right? This is a pretty common thing. You might want to do something to each thing in the file. So one way in which we could do this is we could then iterate through all the things in this list. But for now, I just wanted to show you that Python also has the other function here that does this. But let's keep going line by line. So we don't need to necessarily print the lines anymore because I feel like we got that part down. So we decided that we didn't really want to do a list. We wanted to do a dictionary, right? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, we're going to get a line, right? And then what we want to do is we want to add line. And we're going to make this a function because this is going to be the cleanest way for us to probably kind of encapsulate what this thing is supposed to do. Well, we could repeat it twice, but you see how we're going to have to do it once for the first line, and then we're going to have to do it for the line repeat here. So we're going to add a line to the dictionary, and we're going to actually replace our list call there with that. Okay, so now we have to write this function. Add line to dictionary. Well, what we're going to take in here is we will take in a line, and we will take in the dictionary. So let's define our dictionary that we're going to be using up here. We can do and we're just going to start it out empty.
Okay.
Tracking so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So you see how each line has an item and its price. Well, what we want to do in the dictionary is map the item as a key to its price as a value. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we are going to, let's see, Python. So you see how there's a comma in the middle? This is so-called comma separated value file. And so
Yeah.
the item and its price are separated by a comma here. Now this gets complicated if you have a string that has a comma in it inside of a CSV file. We're not going to worry about that right now, but eventually you will have to handle that. This is why CSV files aren't so common as other file types for storing data, actually, because what happens if you have a string in, one of the rows in the CSV file, and that string contains contains a comma? Well, then your whole data type is kind of messed up then. I mean, you can handle it. They will technically, when the CSV file saves by programs to process them, it usually saves by escaping the comma, puts a backslash in front of it, but then you have to parse that, and it's kind of annoying. So anyway, so we will say how to split a string Python. And so what a split function on strings does is it typically gives you all the characters in a string before something and all the characters in a string after something, or it might do it for multiple occurrences of the thing in the string. And so here's our W3 Schools website, right? You said I like this one. Split a string into a list where each word is a list item. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if we get our function here and we're passing in the line and we have a dictionary, well, we're going to say that the items in line are going to be line.split. And what are we going to split on here?
Or is it the character we will use in the dictionary?
No, okay. I suppose it's not real fair for me to ask you the questions if we haven't done it yet. But we're going to be, by default, string.split splits on spaces. So this right here will return welcome to the jungle, each as items in the list here, like that. Yeah, I'll show you an example since we have our live demo here. If we were to split on the comma character here, I put a welcome to comma the jungle. Well, if we were to split on that, it would split the string based on the comma. You see that?
Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
Okay. So you'll see that it's not a mistake, but it'll be something interesting that we'll get to deal with. So we're going to get the items in the line by splitting on a comma. And so then we're going to want to say, okay, we're going to take the first item in the line, and that represents to us, the item. So we're going to, I should come up with a better variable name than that. I should say item and price. And then we're going to say item is going to equal to, going to be the first index because it comes first on the line, and price is going to equal the second index. Following so far?
Yes, I am.
So then we're going to want to do dictionary item. Now, what I'm curious is if Python will let us add things to a dictionary this way. Let's check, actually. Let's go to W3 Schools. Let's go look at dictionaries. So the thing is, right now, in our empty dictionary, so for example, the first line has basketball. What we're going to do is we're going to assign the index basketball in the dictionary to price. Well, right now, the dictionary has no index called basketball. So what I'm curious about, I actually don't know the answer to this question, is if I try to run this line without anything in the dictionary, will it error out or will it just create the index? Do you see the two options there?
I follow what you just said.
Sorry?
I didn't follow what you just said.
Okay, so what I'm saying, I'm actually not sure what's going to happen here, and we'll have to see. What is this? Undefined and add line. Did I misspell something? Why doesn't it like this? Probably because I have to define it above. Oh, okay, there we go. So here, let me go to the dictionary here. Add items. Usually done by using a new index key and assigning a value to it. So yeah, we can actually do this. So what I wasn't sure is if you try, you know how if you try to access an index in a list, but the index doesn't exist, like you try to access something one more than the length of the list, it will throw an error, right? And if you tried, and you remember how we had actually had an example where we tried to assign a value to something outside of the range of the list, and then it errored out, right? That is actually basically what we're doing here. We have an item, basketball in this case, that doesn't exist because our dictionary is empty. And then we're going to say for the key basketball, we're going to assign it the value that has prices of $10. Well, we're going to do that even though it doesn't exist in the dictionary. But actually, the example here, I just said adding stuff to dictionaries. I went and I found the example for that. Well, it says it's actually fine. That's how you do it. Adding an item to the dictionary is done by using a new index key and assigning a value to it. So this is actually how you do it. I just wasn't sure.
Okay.
Because the other option would be you try to do this for something that doesn't exist in the dictionary, and then it throws an error. And I was thinking maybe you have to use a special method to add something, right? Just how for list you have to use the append method, right? Because if you try to index directly, it throws an error. But if you use append, it works fine, right?
Yes.
So I wasn't sure if that was the way it worked or not, but it looks like this should work okay. Okay, so now we're going to add these things to our dictionary, each one. And then at the end of all this, we're going to go ahead, we're going to print dictionary. Actually, to be specific here, I'm going to pull dictionary out because it really has nothing to do with the scope there on the file. We want the dictionary to persist the file. So if we print dictionary here, let's see what we get. Does that look right to you? Looks right to me.
Yeah.
Right, and then we're still printing our lines from down here.
Okay. I see it.
Okay, so now you see how we have a new line character here, and this is what I was going to bring up. There's also a space before the prices, right? Because when the string splits on the comma, it doesn't trim the space. So if we want to get rid of the space on the string, well, for one thing, my CSV file is actually bad because you're not supposed to put spaces after commas in CSV files, but let's ignore that for a second. And let's say we just want to get rid of the thing. So there is a function to remove white space from strings. So this is usually called the trim function. So maybe it isn't something you wouldn't know if you hadn't worked with strings before, but almost every programming language will have, you know, something that is a way to trim a string. So I typed it in because that's what you call it in like Java, I guess. And so it looks like strip returns a new string after removing any leading or trailing white spaces, including tabs. Okay, that's what we want. We have leading white space here. So we want to do s1.strip, right? So we are going to come to our Python file here. And in this one here, we said that the space that we want to get rid of is on the second item. It's on the price, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to call the strip method on it. And then that should get rid of the leading spaces in the prices here. Ooh, it's being slow. There we go. Got it. No, did that?
It doesn't appear to have worked.
Interesting. Maybe I didn't read closely enough. Why is it being so slow? Now, just to convince ourselves, let's try making an example of our own before we call this. We're going to make the example string. Let's do like something similar to what we have, space 10. And we want to print example string. Is it just me, or did it not even print that?
It didn't print that. I was actually looking to see if it would eventually. It hasn't.
Huh. Maybe there's something wrong with like the space or something. Like, I don't know why the file wouldn't be picking it up, but it doesn't seem to me like it's actually picking up changes here. Lag.
Yeah, but I thought if it was lag, it would print it when you
Okay. And now it's working. So you see, I just reloaded it. So it must have just been an issue with the somehow this window getting out of sync with what we had been saved over here. Because now it works fine.
Okay.
And you see that the strip function actually took care of the new lines for us as well. So the new lines are gone, the leading space is gone. New line, I guess, is considered a white space character here. I wasn't actually sure if it was going to be or not. But that's kind of what we wanted, right? Because we don't care about the new lines for values. Now, one final thing that we're going to want to do is you see right now how these things are strings. Well, what happens if I try to do something like dictionary basketball? This will get the price of a basketball, and I want to add that to dictionary of baseball. If I do this right now, let me show you what happens. Add a new line. So this will be the last thing that prints to the console window here. Is that what we want?
No.
And
No.
so can you tell me why is that happening?
It's treating the numbers as strings too. And
Yeah, are the numbers strings?
That's what I want to see from price and price. Well, yes, they turn into Python as strings.
Yep, and that's because we read the whole line in as a string. And so by default, everything's a string. And then we split the string.
Okay.
We split the string up here using the split function. So then we have the first thing is everything before the comma, second thing is everything after the comma. Then we stripped things from everything after the comma. So we stripped the leading space and we stripped the new line. Okay. And now we have something without a leading space in the new line, but it's still fundamentally a string, right? Because the return value of string.strip is another string. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is we want to convert price. We want to convert price to be something that's not a string. So how we want to do this is we want to say convert string to float. That's what we want to do, because you see how these are floats, not Python, not Java. Should have said Python. Well, that's not very hard, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a string and we're going to convert it to a float by wrapping the string in float. Now, there's two ways to do this. We could do float of price like this, or we could actually wrap everything else that we already had here. Probably because this still isn't too bad, right? We'll probably still do that.
That should be float, right? That should be float rather than price.
Oh, sorry. Yep, you were correct. I don't know. I was thinking there. Float. Like that. And now when we print this, and we print this addition, this should now be 15, I hope. Yep. Now you see these aren't stored as strings anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Does this example make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. Yes.
Okay. And now you see that, well, we're working with data now. We're working with a data file. This makes it really, really easy now. If you actually, now no real financial systems are going to use a CSV file to keep track of their prices, but you see how we have maybe 20 lines of code or whatever. And
Yeah.
if you were by hand keeping track of things, you could actually keep track. It is conceivable that in the dark, dark days before you had software systems that did this for you automatically, someone could actually keep a CSV file on their computer and to calculate if someone was checking out from their store and they had different values, like we just had here with the basketball and the baseball, they could calculate how much to charge the customer by writing something like this, right?
Yeah.
And so this is actually not, now I'm waving my hand and making some assumptions. This is actually not very different from how point of sale services work in stores all around the world. So a user scans a QR code. A QR code is, like the barcode is interpreted by a software program as it comes in as like a set of numbers and text probably. It's probably a unique ID associated with that object. That unique ID is related to a record for that object in the store's database. And the store's database will return the price for that object. And then as many things as the user scans, the price is added to until the user's done scanning and presses checkout, in which case the price is totaled, and that's what the user pays. Now, generally, when we say that the barcode from whatever's being scanned gets found by the financial or like the inventory system here, well, it won't be pulling things from a CSV file. It will be pulling things from a database, but the concept itself is still basically the same, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully the reason why I'm bringing this up is that this should convince you that you already have close to enough knowledge to actually be writing useful real world software, right?
Yeah. This is awesome.
Okay, cool. So this is our sports store example here. This is a very good example of using iteration. Using iteration to go through each line in a file and do stuff to it. So that was the first iteration example we have here. Now I want to ask, what's your time like? Like, do we have half hour, an hour, what?
We're actually out of time. I have to.
Out of time. Okay, well, we'll end there. That's actually a decent place. Other things we're going to do, we're going to be doing an event loop with user inputs because programs need user inputs. And then after that, we'll do exceptions. But so it's a good example today. Hopefully you see that this sort of thing can be useful in the real world, and that's what we're going for. So that's where we'll stop for today then.
Okay.